Hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2024. This is Shellyan Edwards Byron, creative writing specialist here to help you navigate the journey of creative writing and comprehension toward SEA 2024. Now, today it's a special edition because I'm also going to be touching a little bit on worded problems. Now, I came across a conversation in SEA Peaceful Approach a couple days ago, and the person asked, what was the number one issue with math in preparation for SEA? And I think if I checked correctly, it would be close to like maybe 95, 98% of the respondents said worded problems. And so that got me thinking about, what exactly is the issue with the worded problems? Why is it seeming to be like such a big issue for students preparing for this exam? So I decided to revisit something I had done a couple, May that might have been sometime last year, and I'm going to go through that with you today so that you can see some strategies for dealing with worded problems. When I looked at the issue, what I found is that with worded problems, we have two major challenges. The first major challenge with a worded problem is that students have to decipher what the problem is asking them to do and decipher what the information is that they already have. And so, if students don't have that ability to read the words and recognize what the words are telling them, they're going to start off with one major setback when it comes to the worded problem. The other aspect of worded problems that I find gives students quite a lot of challenge is the fact that they need to understand that worded problems have steps. And so sometimes what can happen is that they either miss a step, or in terms of like in their preparation, the sequencing, they might either miss a step or put a step in the wrong order, which could possibly lead to them getting the problem incorrect, getting the wrong answer. So in the worded problem section, they get marks for their working and the answer. So they can get marks either way, but if you want to get the full mark, then what you're really aiming for is a strategy or a procedure that would help them hit that, get the process clear every single time. That's what really we're aiming for. And so for those of you who have been following the live for a long time, you guys know that I'm all about strategies. I'm all about procedures and steps and going into the details, because that is where students really get the confidence going into any situation, whether it's with the writing or the comprehension, and now with the math. Having a plan and having a procedure that they can apply to every problem and to every situation gives them that confidence that, hey, I know what I'm doing and I can get this done. So we're going to be adding that. I'll add that to the end so that you can get a bit more information on that. But I want to go through what we are set to do according to the schedule. I want to get that done first. So as per usual, we're going to be doing the report first, then looking at narratives, and then touching a little bit um on the comprehension before we get into this discussion on worded problems. So all right, so for the reports, what I want to do this week is to talk a little bit about exam strategies and dealing with any situations that may come up during the exam. Now, we touched on this before, and the thing really is now that we are doing a lot of revision and a lot of revisiting of concepts. That's with both the reports and the narratives. And actually, even with the comprehension, we're doing a lot of revisiting of concepts, because the whole point about the preparation, it's not just about, marking and get the answer and then, okay, that answer is incorrect, try again, mark, and then get the answer. It's really about finding out where the issues lie so that you can, deal with the issues and discuss them with the child so that they can figure out how to address them effectively to be more confident in the exam, plus get the marks that they need. Last week, I think it was, or earlier this week, today's Tuesday. Yeah, earlier this week, I was having a conversation with a parent and I asked the question, how does a child process the question? So we were talking comprehension at this point, but this applies to the creative writing as well. How does the child process the problem that's in front of them? And when I say problem, what I mean is, okay, how do they process the question? How do they process the prompt? And I'm talking about when they read the prompt for the creative writing or they read the question for the comprehension, how do they decide um, to approach the issue? How do they process that information? How do they decide what to do first, what to do next, and how to tackle things? When it comes to comprehension, you're asking yourself, how does the child know what the question is asking them? And how do they get the answers? And so, what you want to do this week is to have a conversation with your child, with your students, taking a look at the way they approach their challenges, because understanding this is going to help you identify the different areas or the gaps or misconceptions that could be leading them to answering questions incorrectly. So it's not just a matter of, okay, the child is making careless mistakes and they're rushing. Why are they rushing? Why are they making these mistakes? Every mistake, there is a cause. So this is not just, okay, this is the child and this is what they're doing. What's the reason? What is the cause of this situation? And that is something that you need to look into, because it's not just that they want to rush and they want to get it done with. Why do they want to get it done with? What is the issue? Is it that the exam is intimidating and they just want to finish? Are they feeling anxious and they just want to get through with it and move on to something else? Is it that they feel as if they can't answer this properly, so they skip it, or they think that what the answers that they're getting, they might be getting them too quickly, and therefore they think, okay, if I got this answer so quickly, then this can't possibly be the correct answer, and so they're second guessing and then doing something differently from what they were advised by teachers and tutors, and therefore coming up with the wrong answer. So think about what the possible situation could be and discuss with the child, okay, how do you do this? So for the creative writing, get a couple of prompts. So we're looking at both reports and narratives. Get a couple of prompts and sit with them. And you want to get prompts that are varied. And when I say varied, I mean that when you look at the creative writing prompts, they both for reports and for narratives, they don't all come in the same way, meaning that sometimes they are written differently. And so while I'm saying that, let me share with you so that you can see what I'm talking about. All right? Because you want to present the child with prompts that resemble what they could get on the exam. So ideally, what you want to do is to get an exam prompt, um, and then use that to discuss and analyze the things that you want to look at. So, my recommendation then is to use the 2022, which would be report writing, and the 2023, since they are the most recent. And what you want to do then is to have the child review those prompts and see what they look like, and ask the child, okay, you get a prompt like this, how would you respond? So this is the 2022. So these would be reports. And if you look at the prompts, now we've done prompts before, but in terms of analyzing the prompt and so on, if you haven't seen any of those videos, you can go to the archive and check that out. Actually, later today, what I'm going to do in SEA Peacefield Approach, I'll probably share it on my Facebook page with Coach Youth as well. Um, I'm going to do an episode list for you for all the lives that I've done in this series, going back all the way to April, so that if you want specific details on a particular topic, you can just scan through the document and see which live would be tackling that, and you can go directly there. Now, looking at these prompts, the reason I said you want to use one, the exam itself, and this is the exam for 2022, which deals with reports. The reason is not all the practice tests format their prompts in the similar format as the exam. And so you want the child to be as familiar with the way the exam prompts are normally written as possible, so get the actual past paper. And that's one. Two, you would notice that each prompt is worded slightly differently, and that's because they relate to different types of reports. And you would also want to make sure that the child is familiar with that. And so when you present this with them, ask them, talk it through with them. So you read, how do you, when you open the paper, how do you address it first? Excuse me. Yeah, how do you deal with it? So do you read all the prompts and then decide? How do you decide what makes a difference for you? And then when you select one and you decide to write on that one, how do you plan? How do you organize your ideas? And then when you're writing, what is your process? How do you develop the writing? When you're finished, how do you review and revise? And so you're going through all of these things to see how the child processes, how the child approaches things, and whether or not they're implementing the strategies that they can to get the most marks, and whether or not the strategies actually are working for them. Why are they not implementing certain things that they can? Is it because they don't understand how to implement it? Is it because they're worried about the time? So that's what you're spending time with this week, creating exam strategies. We've spoken about that as well. So when you make a mistake, how do you deal with that mistake? When you have to add in something, how do you do that efficiently and quickly? When you have to remove something, how do you do that? And so you're really just going through exam strategies when it comes to the writing. So this would be the um, reports, and you would see that one is an event, one is an activity, and the other is an incident or accident. And you can look at the way the questions are asked, look at the bullet points. The event asks for what was learned. The activity asked for daily activities, and you'd notice the way the activities are, it's over a period of time as opposed to a single thing. And so you're really going through this to see how the child would approach these things. And let's take a quick look at the narrative. And you would see that with the narratives, there are specific things to pay attention to here as well. And you're going through the same process. When you open the booklet and you read the prompts, how do you select? How do you plan or plot? How do you work with the development? Where do you put certain things? How do you understand how to, make changes? All of those things. We're going through the same process. And so remember that with our schedule, if you're following the schedule, you're dealing with two 30-minute sessions. during the week, and one full-on writing process where you write a complete essay, most likely over the weekend. And so for each one, so for the two 30-minute sessions with the report writing, what you'll be doing is going through the exam. So you have the 2019 and the 2022. You can go through both. And then when you're doing the full writing, you get a new set of prompts that mirror the um the 2020, the report writing, and you're doing the same thing with the narratives. First two sessions, you can do the 2023 and the 2021 because you want the most recent. Um, and you're going through each set of prompts. And then when you're writing fully, you will be having a new set that mirror the exam format as closely as possible. So you might need to like go through practice booklets and double check the prompts and how they're written along with the exam prompts, and pull out and create your own set of three because you want them to mirror these. And for these, with the 2023 narrative, you would notice that the first one has a single person, and we get a scenario. The end of it says write a story based on this scenario. The second one, you have a sentence that you have to begin the story with, and in this case it's begin. Sometimes they say include the sentence in your story. This one, you have to begin your story with this sentence. And the whole thing is, I hollered as we raced to the favorite spot, full stop. That whole thing is what you're beginning with. And so when you look at that, you want to have a prompt that has a sentence that needs to be used in the passage. You want to have a prompt that uses the phrase write a story based on the scenario. And you want to have a prompt as the third one is that says write a story about what happened. And so you want the students to be familiar with the language used in the exam style prompts themselves. And so this week you're looking at how do they respond exactly. So we're really looking at the exam strategies. And so for the creative writing, you're looking at the exam strategies in this way, right? And so for the comprehension, when you're looking at how the student responds to the question, you want to ask them questions like, how do you find your answer? And you want them to like explain to you what they do when they look for the answers. And this is going to help you recognize whether there are gaps in their understanding of dealing with comprehension questions, whether they truly understand what the question is asking them. And so there's a lot of information that you can find out about how the student approaches the exam, and you would be able to give them the exam strategies. Now, of course, the number one exam strategy with comprehension, as we've discussed many times, is to go to the questions first. Why? Because the questions tell students what to look for in the passage. You don't need to understand the entire passage in order to understand how to answer the questions. So you would need to know the question format, how questions are asked, how to respond. And so that's where you begin in terms of the exam strategy. How do you make a change? If you answer a question and you go and then you come back and you read it again and you're like, no, okay, this is not what I wanted to say. How do you make a change? How do you neatly cross out, or do you erase? And so you want to deal with the exam strategies again with the comprehension this week. And that is in addition to revisiting the nonfiction and the graphic, because we remember we're going in a cycle revisiting. We looked at the poetry and the um the fiction before, and now we're going back to nonfiction and graphics. And so while students are doing the full practice tests, when you're doing your revision and your reviews, you want to still continue doing the spot checks with the different types of comprehension issues, right? And that's what you're going to be working with. All right. And so with the reports, exam strategies, with the narratives, exam strategies, and comprehension, exam strategies, while you're working on the fiction and, well, the nonfiction and the graphic. For the narrative, I want to just touch on something to do with the climax and the intervention and how you go through the climax. Now, I'm saying this over and over because I am consistently seeing with my students a misinterpretation of what the climax is. And because I'm not with them every day, we meet once a week and I give them follow up and so on. I am battling against what teachers are saying regards to climax and falling action and so on. And what I'm seeing still is that climax is still misinterpreted, and most people are still looking at climax as the biggest problem and then falling action as the solution to the problem. And that is not what climax is and not what falling action is. Climax is supposed to be the solution to the problem so that the biggest problem should be introduced before that, which would be the height of, the last point as you're going in the rising action, the peak of that plot mountain, as we call it, that is the climax because you're no longer building, you're no longer dealing with additional problems. What you're dealing with is solving the problem at that point so that there's no further increase in conflict or with challenges. All right. And so, in dealing with that, it's very important to make sure students understand three things. One, conflict needs to begin, which would be the complication, the first problem. You need to have that either at the end of the introduction or at the beginning of the second paragraph. And the reason we want that is because you want to be able to have enough time in the story to develop the conflict so that you can see increase and rising action. And then you need to have an intervention, so that's the second thing. You need to have an intervention because the biggest problem is supposed to be so big that the character can't handle it on their own. And so they need some help. And that help could be a memory, somebody giving them something, somebody actually coming physically to help them. It could come in several different ways, but we need that intervention in order for the climax to make sense. We can't just jump from a huge problem to a solution. How did that happen? We need the intervention. The third thing is that your climax is that process of solving the problem. And when you go through that process of solving the problem, you need to make it like a few steps. The problem isn't just a one punch thing. The problem is this climax is not just a one punch thing. The climax is step by step. And so you have to have a few steps in your climax for the climax to feel emotionally charged and to feel impactful for readers. And then the fourth and final thing is that your falling action now is a reaction to the climax. So falling action is not how you solve the problem. Falling action is how you feel after the problem has been solved. And then after you describe that, and remember, reactions have three parts. Reactions need to have emotions, reactions need to have behavior, and reactions should have some sort of speech, whether that speech is out loud, in dialogue, or like thoughts the character is expressing to themselves. So we need to have that. So there's a bit that can be explained. It's not just one sentence. we have some explanations to do. And then finally, your lesson learned will come in the resolution. So there is that process, but the climax doesn't function on its own. The climax is connected to the big problem, which would have already been expressed, and dealing with that, and then how you react is the following action. So make sure your students get that. And the reason I'm harping on this is because what happens when students think that the climax is the biggest problem, what happens is that they spend, out of a 4 paragraph essay, they will spend 2 paragraphs dealing with how the problem began. And then in their third paragraph, they're going to give the climax, which they think is the biggest problem. And then guess what? They have 1 paragraph to develop everything, intervention, solution, reaction to that, lesson learned. That's too much to be compacted in just 1 paragraph and still get it descriptive. So, what's going to happen is that students will feel like they're going to be running out of time and they're going to be rushed in the end. Their climax will not be developed properly. Their reactions, if it's there at all, it's not going to be strong enough. And then they might just have the one part of the lesson learned that's not necessarily connected to anything. All of those challenges come out of the fact that climax is misunderstood. So, this is something that I've mentioned over and over, and it's something that I'm thinking I'm going to keep saying it because it's an issue that creates challenges for students. And what I did when I did the sample booklet, so the for those of you who aren't aware, the sample booklet is out, and I am actually, so in that sample booklet, sorry, there are 3 sample reports, 3 sample narratives, and I did a little note on climax just to make sure that it is clear because of the fact that climax is so misunderstood. So if you don't already have your copy of the sample booklet, it's just $50. Excuse me, you could WhatsApp me to get a copy so that you can see how all these things are generated. I'm going to put my number on, right? I'm going to put my number up so that you can get my number. Send me a WhatsApp message if you don't already have your copy of the information, the sample booklet, because it has the 3 samples, but I did put a special note in there on climax to make sure it is clear so that you have it written, you know exactly how to share it with your child or your students. All right. Okay, so that is what I wanted to cover with the reports, narratives, comprehension. And again, with that, you're revisiting things, you're spending the 2 30-minute sessions, looking at the exam strategies. And then when you do the full booklets, the full report, full narrative, full comprehension, what you're dealing with is implementing any of the adjustments that you suggested during the revision session. All right, so now we're going on to the worded problems. So I'm going to share my screen in a bit, but let's see. Yeah, I might have to type this up because I'm trying to figure out how was the best way to share that. So let's see. What I want to share with you with the worded problems is a strategy that I call 6D problem solving. And we're dealing with um, the D's are actually um, different words, different strategies for the problem solving. And so I'm going to just type that up on the screen so that you can see it before we go through each of them. So it's really define, discover, and then dream, then design, deliver, and debrief. Right? Those are the 6 Ds in the problem solving strategy. And let's see. So that's it there. So 6D problem solving: define, discover, dream, design, deliver, debrief. Now, you don't absolutely have to tell the students it this way, but I'm showing you the process so that you can introduce it in the easiest way possible. Because what this process does is that it helps students see approaching worded problems in a step by step way. And so when it comes to dealing with worded problems, what you're really looking at is making sure that students understand that there are steps and there are different strategies and different approaches to the different steps. And so while we're not necessarily going to go into the math part of it, because actually with worded problems, the math part of it is actually the least part of it in terms of the challenges that students have. Some of them, once they know what to do, they do it well. It's just that they can't figure out exactly what to do. And so that is what you really want to get into. And when you're getting into it, it's not just a matter of, okay, presenting them with a worded problem and have them work it out and look at their working and say, okay, that's not the correct answer, um and you just give them the format. You want to understand, just as we did with the reports and so on. You want to understand how they process the information. When they get a worded problem, what do they do first? What do they do next? Because of the fact that it's a step by step thing, you really want to know what steps they take and how they approach each step. Because if you don't go through the different steps, if you skip steps, you can skip an aspect of the problem and therefore get an incorrect working and an incorrect answer. If you don't go through the process effectively, then students miss things. So when you go through the problem solving process, you want to check and see what they need to know at each step and how they can get the solutions effectively. So this is what you're doing. So you're going through this step by step and you're checking in with their knowledge at each step. So let's take a look at the first step. The first step would be the define. So I'm going to share screen. And incidentally, for those of you who are in SEA Peacefield Approach, this entire thing is on SEA Peacefield Approach. It's in the photos section. You can check it. It was a post, and I did this some time ago. So you can actually go and get a copy of this, download it, and go through the different steps because I did an explanation on each step. So this Oh, I forgot to put the question here. All right, so let me just go quickly to Peacefield. Um, yeah, let me just go to Peacefield. Wow, I got logged out of Facebook. That is interesting. All right, so I'm trying to. All right, let me go to my notes then and get the question, because this is the process for the working of the question and it does not include the actual question. So let me get you the actual question. Right. Right. So this was the actual question. I'll put it up on the screen. Right. So here we go. I'll take down the process and here's the question. Share a watermelon between Olga and Peter. Give Olga twice as much as Peter. What fraction does Olga receive? And so the question has a couple parts to it, and this is one of the unequal sharing type questions. And so what we're looking at here is in the first thing a student must do is to figure out what is the question asking. So, and in the first instance, they absolutely must understand what the question is asking, meaning, in addition, how do they have to share their answer? So we didn't ask how much did Olga get. The question is what fraction did Olga receive? So we're looking at ending up with a fraction. The answer has to be presented in a fraction. So the first thing is looking at defining what is the question asking. So you read the question and we're going through the process, and students should write these things down if they need to. Some students, once they get the process and it just automatically flows in their mind, they don't necessarily need to write it down. But if your student is consistently missing steps, giving the incorrect answer, or having challenges with these kinds of questions, then by all means have them write it down and get them into the habit of just making quick notes, because they would be showing the process of their working and they get marks for process as well. So, what fraction did Olga receive? So you might want to have them maybe underline. We know we have to give our answer in a fraction. So that's the first bit, which would be define. Then we want to discover what information did the question give us. So remember, we're sharing a whole watermelon between Olga and Peter. And we know that Olga plus Peter is the whole watermelon. So we're writing down, and now you notice what we're doing here is that we're converting the words into an equation. And this is the part that many students have trouble with, converting the words into an equation. So the first thing to do is to discover, just write down exactly, we know Olga and Peter, whole watermelon. And then we go through and decide, okay, if I have to get a fraction, what do I need to do here? Um, do I need to, how much information do I have? How many steps in this process do I need? And so this is where students have a little bit of challenge as well. But once they do just a quick brainstorming and put the notes down, when they get to this part, which is designing the equation that they're going to work with to get the answer, this is where we end up with them having some challenges with the wording. So in this question, we had, let me put the question back up. We had give Olga twice as much as Peter. And so in this case, we're looking at Olga plus Peter equals the whole watermelon. Excuse me. Now, Olga has two times what Peter has. It says twice as much. If a student does not understand what twice as much means, they're going to run into problems. And so part of the design process is making sure that students understand the terms and the terminologies used in worded problems. So, what you would want to do is to get a copy of a word list, right? A keyword list for math. There are lots of them online. This is one I found this morning, just searching through, so that I could show you, right? And you could probably go through the worded problems because this is just like a general idea of some of the terms that are used. But of course, you're looking at how the terms are used in particular sentences, right? Let's see, we have twice here. So we have twice as much. So you might want to put twice as much. That would be two times. And so you want to create it in a way that it matches the type of words and phrases that are used in the SEA exam. So you can, I know this one is one of those random ones because, in general, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, worded problems is an issue. So you can actually find online lots of different ones, but you don't want to have the student just learn this off in a vacuum like this. You want to show them examples so that they can see how it is used and therefore understand what each word would mean within the context. So you might want to gather a few worded problems. I know in SEA Peacefield, Miss Giselle has beautiful worksheets with worded problems and different math issues that you can focus on. So you can check in SEA Peacefield and see what she has so that you could go through and maybe underline and check, and you're really double checking what the student knows about these worded problems and the wording, the terminology that they use, so that they can be able to translate the words into an equation that they can calculate. And so we're not just going from the first one, which is what we sort of wrote down when we started creating our equation. We know that this equation, Olga plus Peter, is not going to automatically give us the answer. Why? Because of that phrase that said Olga had twice as much. All right. So because we know Olga has twice as much, then what we're going to do is to look at how much, whatever amount Peter has, she has two times Peter. And so now what we're doing is that we're bringing everything to something that we can calculate. And now we realize that two times Peter plus Peter would be three. So three Peter will equal the whole, and therefore we have three pieces. But this is not the answer exactly as it is. Why? Because remember, we need a fraction. And so there's another step here. And recognizing that this is not the answer starts with understanding what the answer requires. And that's why we did that first step of what is the answer requiring? A fraction. So while the student is calculating, they're keeping in mind that there's a fraction that I need to get. So how do I get this fraction now? Then I know Olga has two and the whole is three. So I put Olga over the whole, and then I get my answer. But then how do we know to get to this point? We know to get to this point because the student understands fractions and how to create a fraction. So knowing what to do is one thing, knowing the mathematical actions, that's another thing, being able to recognize the words, that's a third thing. And so this is the challenge with the worded problems. It's not as simple as, doing the figures, and it's not as simple as understanding the words. So you have to understand the words, get them into figures, do the calculation, and then make sure that you are representing the answer in the way the answer was requested. Right? So we're not just asking how many pieces did Olga get, we want to get a fraction. So students have to know certain things. So there are foundational concepts. So they have to know fractions, they need to know decimals, they would need to know all the other things that they would need to know for the rest of the exam. They do need to have a foundation in that. But of course, with the worded problem, they now have to apply that using that translation of words into equations and information. And then after they've done this, they go back and double check their steps. Are their calculations correct? Did they do the correct multiplication? Because sometimes in the rush they might say do things like 4 threes are 10 by accident. And so one or two of their calculations might be incorrect. So they might get marks for working, but the actual answer could be incorrect because of things missed in between. And this is another reason why students need to write these things down and not just automatically do it in their head, especially when they are learning. After a few times, students who are not having challenges and they're just going through, they can do it quickly and, double check and they would get it correct, not an issue. But for students who are struggling, they do need to write it down line by line so that they can see they're working, show they're working, and therefore, when they're going back to the debrief, they would be able to review and see what's going on. So let's go back to the top, right? And see what it looks like. So the first thing is you need to define what is the question asking me to find out. How am I supposed to present my answer? When they're doing this, they're analyzing the question, right? And so you're underlining that part that says, um, let me go back to the question. So that part that says, what fraction does Olga receive? We're underlining that part and maybe circling the word fraction because that's going to be a reminder of how the answer is supposed to be presented, right? And then from that, we're going to start making a note of what the question has given us. So we know we have one watermelon. We know we're sharing it between two people, right? And after that, how do I calculate my answer? I start thinking, okay, first I need to find out how much Olga received, and then I need to um, divide that by the whole in order to get my fraction. And so there's a quick brainstorming thing that happens here. And for the different types of worded questions, then you might want to go through step by step and model to the student how to process and how to figure out each of the steps that are needed. And then you design the mathematical formula, you create an equation, and based on the steps that you figured out, write down the equation in the different steps so that you can figure out the answers. And then finally, delivering, which is putting the information to the final point so that you can get the final answer. Then you know how to present the answer because when you go back and check the question, you would see the word fraction circled, and that would give you the response, right? So check it out in SEA Peacefield Approach. You have this whole thing designed and shown. You get all the graphics there with explanations so that you can see it. And so you would be able to go through the different steps, make sure you can show the students how to go through the different steps. And then from that, you would be able to see where the student is falling short because now you have a strategy for approaching the worded problems. You're not just trying to get an answer, you're going through a step by step process. And in the beginning, the first time you do it might take a bit of time, but the more you practice with this step by step process, is the better the student will be able to identify that step by step process and be able to see it. So of course you need to get that document that gives the words to the worded problem and what they mean in terms of the mathematical function. Then you have to make sure students look at the process so that they know there's a process. Worded problems have a process. It's not just a quick answer. Worded problems have a process. And then you want them to have a strategy for approaching that process that they can go step by step. Even if they do each step really quickly, they still do have to go through step by step to get to the answer. So if your student is really struggling with the worded problems, take that approach and over time, so you want to do a couple worded problems every day, maybe just two, because you don't want to overwhelm them. So maybe do one or two worded problems every day so that you could look at the different kinds of worded problems and then you apply this step. You apply the six different steps and that is going to help. And I can tell you, I am I'm an English teacher, I'm a creative writing instructor mainly, and I deal with comprehension. But I can tell you something. Um, Worded problems is really about comprehension because you're looking at deciphering words into the equations and formulas and functions. That's one. Two, having step by step, having something to do, students knowing what happens at each step, what that does is that it builds more confidence in them that they can do it because it's not just a random thing. It doesn't feel random and open and, free anymore. It actually has a step by step thing that they could memorize and therefore do step one, this, step two, that, and go through. And that step by step process gives them more confidence in approaching it so they don't feel intimidated by the worded problems anymore. It's going to minimize their anxiety and therefore they would have a much better chance at getting it correct. And then finally, once they're writing it down, they can go back and double check and therefore understand the process, right? So these are the things that I've seen with the worded problems and what I have done in students that I have worked with. And I don't deal with the math, but if I check in with my one-on-one students and I see, well, hey, they're having challenges with the worded problems, I know that's mainly a comprehension issue because if they're doing great in the other sections, and it's only the section with the worded problems that they're having challenges with. It's not that the child doesn't know the math. They're having issues with the comprehension and translating it into what they need. So a session like that with my students, I generally have just like two sessions, and that might be like 2 hours. And then by the end of that, I can guarantee they usually develop and they get, so you can have a student going from, 45 to 60 just by implementing that strategy, dealing with the worded problems step by step, right? And so I just gave you the whole concept, the whole strategy, and the process. And you can go through that 6 step process. The more you go through it, the faster it will happen. And so you would go from taking 10 minutes with a question to taking 5 to taking 3, depending on how quickly the student adapts and remembers what they're supposed to do. And that is going to make a difference in their responses. So this week, work on that. 2 worded questions every day. You can get the worded questions from Miss Giselle. You have past papers, you have practice tests that you can work with. Go back to them, compile the worded problems, and go through each worded problem following that system. And between now and the exam, you will be surprised. It's not a lot of time, but it will amaze you at the progress a student can make in just a week or two working with the strategy. It's all about exam strategies, really. You'd be surprised. So, I hope this has been helpful. And I know worded problems is an issue, so that's why I said let me do this special today. And so you have your agenda for the reports, you have your agenda for the narratives, you have your agenda for the comprehension, and now you have an agenda for the worded problems that you can implement just 20 minutes every day, 2 worded problems, and you would be well on your way to increasing those marks. All right. So have a wonderful rest of the day today. And I do hope that the session has been helpful for you. Please let me know. It always is nice to find out from parents and teachers if the sessions were helpful so that I know that I'm on the right track. I know I've been asking this over and over, but sometimes I really do feel like I'm speaking into a void because it's just me here. you know and it really is encouraging, so let me know, and of course ask your questions. You can get me on my phone number, WhatsApp me. Right now I'm on WhatsApp only for the moment. So please WhatsApp me and send me your questions. Let me know if I can't deal with it directly with you. I will at least do a live on it so you can get the information and other people can be helped as well. So the more questions I get from you, the more I know what it is you need and I'd be able to address that. All right. So have a wonderful rest of the day today, guys, and know that, like I said, you're not alone in this journey. I know about this time it's kind of getting a little bit anxious, but don't worry, you're getting there. You have your strategies, and consistent work with them will yield results. So have a good one, and I'll be here next week again. I'll see you next week. Take care, guys.